To get a bit of background, this meeting is intended to invite our community into our decision-making process. Our entire roadmap is all online and public. These meetings are a place where we invite our community to help us figure out what we're going to be building for the next release. Help communicate your priorities, your bug fixes, things that are bothering you, things that are blocking you from using Deis in production, things like that. This is a great time to do that. This meeting is a little bit different. If you've noticed, this week we did cut a new Deis release, but it is a patch release. It is not a minor release. That was mainly just a virtue of the fixes that got in for this release. We follow strict semantic versioning policies, so the changes that did get merged were not enough to necessitate a new minor release. So this meeting we wanted to talk a bit about this release, as we always do. What went in, why you should care, why you should consider upgrading. And then we're going to shift our focus to two other things. We're going to dive a little bit into detail on Deis v2, which is something that we've been talking about for several months now. And we're going to explain a little bit. We can shed more light into where we are with that and the alpha, beta, and stable release targets so that you can start using on Deis v2 on Kubernetes. And then we're also going to introduce the idea of a Deis v1.x LTS release. We understand that not everyone is going to be able to upgrade to Deis version 2 right away. Some people may not want to use Kubernetes. We think that it's the right scheduler for our workload, but we understand that not everyone is going to need to jump on that right away. So we want to invite you to help us kind of plan what that the last major release of Deis v1.x will be, what features it needs to have, and that's something we'll maintain for the foreseeable future in terms of bug fixes and security fixes, but not for new features. So that's what we're going to hit on today. I'm going to kick things off. Matt Borzman is going to talk a bit about the release and then about the LTS release. And then we're going to have Nick, one of our product managers, talk a bit about Deis version 2. So Matt Borzman, if you want to take over.
Sure. Everybody hear me okay? Great. First, I feel like I have to remind everybody of what we have been calling Docker D-Day. I apologize if you know all about this, but it really is pretty important. So on Monday, next Monday, December 7th, Docker is going to start refusing Docker pull from Docker Hub for any client version 1.5 or earlier. They already shut off access to Docker push a couple weeks ago. You may or may not have noticed, depending on your workflow with Deis. And this is the second half of the deprecation event that we've been calling Docker D-Day. It's going to cause problems for anyone who is using Deis previous to version 1.12. So if you're using 1.11 or earlier, it's extremely unlikely that things are going to work perfectly for you come Monday. And there was really no feasible way to patch this for existing versions of Deis, so the best we could do is refactor things in Deis version 1.12. So the critical path code is more flexible about the version of Docker we're using. And more importantly, we're just using newer versions of Docker that will keep playing nice with Docker Hub and other tools into the future. Certainly, we hope so. So again, we encourage everybody to provision a new 1.12 cluster if you haven't already, because it's very unlikely you're not going to see any problems come Monday. Anyway, enough about that. The 1.12 release, like Chris was saying, went out on Tuesday. That usually would have been Deis version 1.13 as our usual cadence, but we didn't have any actual features merged, just bug fixes, which is fine, so it ended up being a patch release. Specifically, we fixed an issue where if you had HTTPS configured for S3, Wally on the database didn't really know what to do, so that's fixed. We added dependencies so that Flannel will always start before Docker. There were a couple odd time. It always should have, but there were some timing cases where that wouldn't have happened. There was an odd restart case where Deis Builder might come up and not recognize a Git repo. That shouldn't happen anymore. Deis CTL could crash if you gave it a really malform. I mean, it would exit with a stack trace when you gave it a bad key value for config. That's fixed. And there was a Kubernetes preview scheduler app routing problem that we also fixed. And that's literally everything that went into it relative to the previous release. So it was a patch release, not a minor release, because we didn't merge any features, just fixes. And I'm sure you know most of our engineering efforts overall have been focused on Deis version 2 on Kubernetes, and we'll talk about that in a few more minutes. But we are definitely still investing in Deis version 1 on CoreOS, and we're always going to accept bug fixes and improvements, and we'll make patch releases as needed forever. Having said that, the other goal, like Chris mentioned, is a Deis LTS release. So beyond just fixing the known bugs that are out there, we intend to have a Deis release that we can call LTS, you know, long-term support, just like Ubuntu Linux or other products that use that term. And we intend that to mean it's a stable release that you can hang your hat on. It's going to continue to be supported as long as you need it to be. But specifically, it means all important bug fixes that come up are going to be backported to the LTS release. So currently, if we find an issue in Deis and we fix it, that fix only is going to go into the current version. We don't generally go back and apply the same fix to earlier versions of Deis, like 1.9 or 1.8. You'll have to upgrade to get the bug fix. But with an LTS release, we will do that. Anything that comes up, even in version 2, if there's a change we find that is relevant, we will backport that and make sure that the LTS release has all the relevant fixes. So if the next minor release, Deis 1.13, let's say in January, becomes the LTS release, it's going to have an explicit statement about what I just mumbled about here, continued bug fixes, and we'll give you a horizon about how long we intend to continue that support. We're pretty pumped about Deis version 2 on Kubernetes, but like Chris said, not everybody's going to be able to upgrade right away. And we know you have investments in Deis version 1. That's why we're all here. So an LTS release is basically our promise to you that Deis version 1 is going to continue to be a great place to deploy your apps. But you know, in order to ensure that that's really true, we need your help. So if you're using Deis today, undoubtedly you have some pain point that really needs to be addressed, and before you would consider a Deis release to really be an LTS. And so we have some idea of what those issues are, but we don't want to miss anything. So I created an issue on GitHub. It's Deis 4776. I'll post it in the chat here in a second. It's just a meta issue that's basically saying if you have something that you would be offended if it didn't go into an LTS release, make sure we know about it. Whether it's pointing to an existing GitHub issue or just making a comment saying this needs to be fixed, we just want to make sure we don't miss any of your feedback. Now, having said that, keep in mind we don't intend to do any actual new feature development on Deis version 1 unless adding new functionality is the only way to get to a goal necessary to call it LTS. So that is, we're really just looking for critical bug fixes. And if your comment is going to start out with, well, it would really be nice if, we're just going to have to reject it. You know how it is. So once we've got people's feedback there on that issue, again, it's 4776, then we'll go update the roadmap document. So we've collected all that and we're announcing again in public, visibly, this is what's on the roadmap for the Deis LTS release. Are there any questions about either the patch release or what we're going to do for the LTS release? Okay. That's about all I had, but feel free to interrupt me and ask me questions here or afterward. And thanks for being here. Like I said, you know, most of our effort is going into version 2, but we're definitely not going to neglect version 1. And with that, let me hand it over to Nick, and he can tell you about how Deis version 2 is going.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Just wanted to kind of make a couple notes on the plan for version 2. The design documents is out on GitHub, so again, we encourage everyone to review it and offer feedback on there accordingly. And just wanted to mention that, you know, this is still under very active development, and we are anticipating the alpha release probably before the end of the year, and not an exact date yet, but wanted to just underscore for anyone who wasn't expecting it that this is, you know, very alpha, and do not recommend deploying this to a production cluster. We would like people to kick the tires and try and stand up a cluster and apply it to their existing Kubernetes cluster if you have one. But definitely hold off until probably the beta or perhaps even the release candidates as we get towards that. But as we get towards a beta and we have a better idea of the stability, you know, we'll be able to offer better guidance there. We just kind of wanted to underscore that. We do have an issue as well out on the project. It's 4743, and that actually kind of goes over some of the broad strokes of what we're expecting for the alpha release, and we'll have the subsequent beta as well. So please take a look at that. That's actually still a work in progress, but take a look at it, give us your feedback, and we'll kind of go from there. I think that's about all I had for V2. I don't know if Chris, you had anything else?
Yeah, Nick, could you just comment on kind of how we see the difference between alpha, beta, and stable, just at a high level, and the promises that we're making with those?
Yeah, sure. So for alpha, really what we're looking at is kind of using an existing Kubernetes cluster on AWS or GKE and really applying Deis on top of that for alpha, and really kind of getting it internally, kind of walking through some dogfooding for ourselves. Beta is going to be much more stable, and that's where we definitely want all of your involvement to help prove this out and understand where the deficiencies are, and really just doing a lot of shoring up and bug fixing. And finally, for that stable release would be the production ready Deis v2. So that's kind of the evolution as we see it.
Thank you. Does that make sense to everyone? Are there any questions? I know we've been talking about Deis v2 for a while now. If you've looked at the activity, a few things you'll notice is a lot of our efforts, as Matt said, are moving toward v2. What that means practically speaking is that you'll see us less on the Deis repo, and instead a lot of the components now have their own separate repositories in the Deis organization. So if you're interested in the routing mesh, for example, go see Deis router. Each of those projects follows our contribution guidelines, follows our maintainership guidelines, code reviews, Jenkins pipeline, things like that. But they're now all kind of independent, but interdependent as well. So the Deis v2 release will, Travis, I said Jenkins. The Deis v2 release is an association of these different workloads that will all run together. The goal here is to get it so that you can very easily run Deis on top of Kubernetes. To that end, we've developed a tool called Helm, which I believe we showed off last time. But Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes. So Deis will be installable as a Helm workload. So to try out Alpha, you'll be able to Deis install Helm, or Helm install Deis, and get the workload up and running. So if any of those things are new to you, we encourage you to check them out on GitHub. We're on the mailing list, the user list on IRC. There's also a Helm channel on IRC as well. So hopefully that's helpful. Are there any questions at all? Today was going to be a short meeting. The release was pretty small, and we just wanted to touch base with V2 and the LTS release. That's the big thing that we have this month is please be involved. Please help us plan this LTS release. Please make it be the stable release of Deis 1x that we need moving forward. As we start getting people moved over to Kubernetes in version 2. So if you have some time to sit down and think about that, think about what that release could be, please give your feedback on that issue. And we'll be happy to take any comments, questions now as well, if anybody has anything. Question in chat: is there something we can do to be ready for version 2? Yes, I think exposure to Kubernetes. If you're running I don't know if Matt Butcher's on, if he can add any context to this, but if you're running Deis 1x with the optional Kubernetes scheduler now, you've already been exposed to a lot of it. The nice thing about Deis on Kubernetes is once you install Deis as a workload, you don't really have to know how Kubernetes works or the underlying architecture. But as an operational person, the more you're exposed to that, the better. So I would say familiarity with that. One of the nice things about V2 is kind of a step backwards. You'll notice with Deis now, our releases are tied to specific CoreOS releases, right? Specific fleet, specific etcd versions. Version 2 on Kubernetes, we no longer care about those things. If you have Kubernetes running somewhere, a minimum release of Kubernetes, then Deis will work as a workload on top of it. So to that extent, there's probably less that you would have to do installing Deis version 2 on Kubernetes than you do now. But to the extent that you want to start thinking about it, start playing with it, running a second cluster, as soon as the alpha is installable, which I think we're almost to that point now, getting it up and trying it, playing around with the new cluster. The alpha is feature complete for most of the components, but it will be not HA. So, you can play around with it, but it's not meant to tolerate long-running workloads. And then the beta will be Deis Alpha plus HA, and the stable will be production-ready, resilient Deis. So that's kind of the plan. Yeah, so if you're running Kubernetes already, yeah, absolutely, you can install Deis in the cluster. That's one of the beautiful things about this is, we no longer care your underlying infrastructure. If you're on GKE, AWS, whatever, if you have Kubernetes, we can build on top of that. Awesome. Any other questions? Cool. Well, we're not going to keep you guys any longer. Thanks, as always, for taking time out of your day to join us. Oh, is there a question? Okay. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. We greatly value and appreciate your time. And a lot of the fun of building an open source project is inviting you to join us. So as always, we're here. Questions, comments, feedback, IRC, GitHub, mailing list. Email us directly, chris@deis.com. Most of us have our first name at deis.com. So private feedback is welcome too. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys next month. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.